I'm really looking forward to grabbing dinner with Susan at the pub. It's been a while. However, after getting settled in and enjoying ourselves for a bit, I hear a familiar voice from a nearby table. Listening closely, I realize it's Thomas, who should be at home, chatting with another woman. Is he cheating? Worried, I quickly activate a recording app on my phone and start capturing their conversation. Little did I know this would lead to a situation that would require calling the police. My name is Mary. I'm a 28-year-old office worker without any remarkable accomplishments. I got married last year to Thomas, and although we're living modestly, we've been enjoying our married life. Currently, we've both been working in the city after moving from a suburban area. Adjusting to city life hasn't been easy for me, as I lived with my parents until recently. The reason we moved here is primarily to accommodate Thomas's work. At first, everything was exciting and fun, quite different from my hometown in Philadelphia. But the excitement wore off quickly. Life in the city is expensive, and people seem a bit colder than I'm used to. So I suggested to Thomas that we spend the winter visiting my parents. Surprisingly, he was enthusiastic. We quickly prepared and headed to my family home. What I hadn't told Thomas was that my parents own an old warehouse. The stuff inside is covered in dust and in a terrible state. However, Thomas's eyes lit up when he saw it. He loves those TV shows where they unearth hidden treasures from old buildings and safes. "There's got to be incredible treasures in this warehouse," Thomas exclaimed. "The TV shows say warehouses like this often contain valuable antiques. We should clean it up right away and have it appraised." Excited like a kid on a treasure hunt, Thomas starts exploring the warehouse. And given that it's winter, the temperature inside the unheated warehouse is in the single digits. Sure, I got concerned. Maybe we should call it a day? Just because there's stuff in the storage unit doesn't mean it's valuable. Plus, it's freezing. We could get sick working out here. Let's come back when it's warmer, maybe around springtime. When I suggest this, Thomas looked a bit reluctant, but said, "All right." After that, we headed inside the house and had a warm reunion with my parents. A few days into our stay, Susan reached out. "Long time no see. Heard you're back in town. Want to catch up like old times? How about meeting at a local pub? Let me know." Apparently, Mom had told the neighbors I was back. My heart leapt at the message, and I quickly replied, "Definitely, let's chat like we used to. Can't wait." We touched base a few more times to finalize the details. Thomas had work to do at home, so I went out on my own. I was a bit nervous meeting Susan after so long, but arrived at the designated spot. Turns out Susan was already there. "Long time, huh? Fill me in on your city life." We headed into the restaurant we had reserved and took our seats, reminiscing about the good old days. We ordered beers and appetizers and kicked back. We were having such a good time that we got a bit rowdy. About 30 minutes in, we finally settled down. Just then, with a cheerful greeting from a waiter, new customers were seated nearby. At first, I paid no mind, but then I thought, huh? When I heard one of them speak, it sounded like Thomas. Thomas had said he was working from home. Curious, but also thinking, maybe he needed a break from being alone at my parents' house. I got up to approach him. That's when I heard another voice. A woman's voice. Was he out meeting a woman behind my back? But their conversation didn't sound flirty. I was about to speak when Thomas said something shocking. "Look, Karen, I'm glad we went through with today's plan. That storage unit was filled with what looked like valuable antiques. They were dusty and not in the best condition, but they're worth a lot nonetheless." I almost blurted out in shock. The Karen that Thomas was talking to was actually an old friend of mine. We used to hang out a lot before I married Thomas and moved to the city. I thought the name sounded familiar, but never imagined it would be her. More than that, I wanted to confront them. When did they meet? What was their plan? But I held back and continued eavesdropping. Then Karen spoke up. "Right. Mary's family has always been careless with that warehouse. They don't trust that there are valuable things in there. It's a waste, really. We just need to take it and sell it, maybe buy a cot with the money. But what about you? If you get caught robbing your wife's place, you're done for. My mind went blank. I almost forgot Susan was with me. But Susan, having heard everything, whispered,
"This doesn't sound like a joke. Let's record this. If we go to the police, it's better to have the conversation as evidence."
I reached for my phone, my hands trembling. I steadied my shaking hand with the other and started the recording. Throughout, they continued to demean me. Then another bombshell dropped.
"Lisa will be at the warehouse soon, right? Tell her not to mess this up,"
Thomas said to Karen. Lisa was also one of my new friends, smart and knowledgeable, helping me often with schoolwork. Lisa was in on this too? I couldn't believe it. Why? What did I do to deserve this? Susan comforted me, and I managed to compose myself. Susan continued the recording, while I rushed to the restroom and called the police. The officer seemed skeptical, but said,
"We'll increase patrols."
Not entirely trusting the police, I alerted my neighbors to be vigilant and lock their doors. I then called my parents and emailed all the neighbors I could reach. Though they seemed skeptical, they promised to be cautious. Relieved, I returned to where Susan was sitting. Just then, Thomas's phone rang. Judging by his reaction, Lisa had failed to rob the warehouse. Thomas began to complain about the current situation. From the conversation, it seemed they were meeting here to create an alibi for Lisa. If anything went wrong, they planned to say that Lisa was dining with Karen. Why would they choose this pub as their alibi location on the day I decided to go out for drinks? Inside, I felt a sense of relief mixed with a serves-you-right kind of satisfaction. From that point on, I quietly began preparations for a divorce to free myself from Thomas. First up was getting ready to move out. I tried my best to act normal so I wouldn't arouse suspicion. Turns out preparing to move was more challenging than I thought. Moreover, keeping it from Thomas added an extra layer of stress. But I didn't do this all alone. Susan, who had recorded the conversation for me, lent a helping hand with various tasks. I was so grateful for her support. Thanks to her help, I was able to complete the preparations much faster than I had anticipated. I then immediately filed for divorce from Thomas. When I explained the reasons, he brushed it off.
"You can't divorce me over some made-up story. Stop joking and let's prepare dinner."
But the moment he heard the recorded conversation, his face turned ashen.
"What is this?"
he said in a low voice. I laid it all out for Thomas. How he and Karen were scheming at the pub, how Susan and I were sitting nearby, and how we prevented them from stealing antiques from my family's warehouse. Upon hearing this, Thomas finally admitted his guilt. However, he had no intention of going through with the divorce. That's understandable. After all, his parents had passed away, leaving him with no home to return to, but I flatly rejected his plea. He begged repeatedly, but eventually accepted the inevitable when I hinted at legal action. Finally, a massive weight lifted off my shoulders. I headed straight to the courthouse and finalized the divorce. As for Thomas, he seemed lost, unsure of what to do next. 2 days later, I got a call from Nancy. Apparently, Thomas, Karen, and Lisa were all blaming each other for their shared debacle. In fact, Lisa had planned to have a male friend help her move items from the warehouse. But Nancy had called the police when she saw this unfamiliar man after my tip about suspicious activity. The police patrols increased, and Lisa couldn't even get close to my house. She had no choice but to flee. The trio was busy pointing fingers at each other.
"You should have been more careful, Lisa. I can't believe you brought some guy without telling us,"
said one.
"Well, you two should have been the cautious ones. How did you not notice Mary was nearby? Why was Mary at the pub in the first place?"
Excuse me? The only confusing thing here is your logic. I just listened to Thomas's plan and had a drink. I didn't do anything. So it's the two of you who are at fault. I'm not involved," said Karen.
"What are you talking about? I had no intention of doing anything like this. You're the ones who took my stupid idea and acted on it. I'm not the one to blame,"
Thomas retorted. Nancy told me, "You should sue them," but I just wasn't feeling it. Honestly, the effort to sue and actually win seemed too much. I could probably win, but I didn't want to waste any more time or money on these jerks. After that, Thomas kept begging to get back together.
It was just a joke back then. They took it too far. I didn't do anything, I promise. I won't do something stupid like that again,
he said, but I didn't trust him. Eventually, Thomas just disappeared. All three were busy convincing their friends that they weren't in the wrong, and eventually those friends drifted away. Word got around the neighborhood about what they'd done, and it seems like Thomas couldn't take the heat and vanished. Karen and Lisa were still bad-mouthing each other, but they also couldn't handle the cold stares and disappeared. Rumors circulated. Some say they became recluses. Others say they fled far away. Suing them now would be a hassle, so I discussed things with my parents and decided to put this chapter behind me. The mess all started with the warehouse cleaning. It took some time, but we tidied up all the antiques in the warehouse and sold whatever we could. Turns out there were some valuable pieces in there, and we made quite a sum. In hindsight, Thomas did have a good eye for antiques, but with the money, we decided to take our first trip overseas. Up until now, we've been too busy and not financially ready for international travel. I quickly invited my parents. They were totally up for it, saying opportunities like this are rare. After we get back, we're planning to take a domestic trip with Susan, the real MVP of this whole saga.
Have you decided where you're going?
I'm still torn. Dad wants to go to Australia and Mom's rooting for Europe.
What a happy dilemma.
Thank you. Let's go together when we're back. Susan grinned and said,
I'm looking forward to it.
As I'm getting excited about my first international trip, I'm also wondering what souvenir to get for Susan.